Here we will be taking a look at the Jutes, a faction that came with the Viking forefathers culture pack. Now for generals options you have the very weak Nordic warlord. He can do some damage in shield wall, but mostly this is just to have a sturdy generals option that you can keep close to your main line for his morale boosting effects or his abilities. Now he does have scare, but that's a trait that most of the important Viking units have anyway. A step up from him we have a very fragile general, the Nordic raid leader. Don't be fooled by his low melee attack. Because he has a massive charge bonus and a bonus versus infantry, he can actually rack up the kills massively against infantry, and he is a very cost effective axe unit with a lot of armor for his price. The problem with him though, he has a lot of health as well, so he's a very good unit, but he just dies so easily to cavalry, missiles and precursors. So if this unit wasn't a general, it would be close to overpowered, but since it's a general's options, you risk a lot by putting your general in a unit that is as squishy as the Nordic raid leader. Then we have the Viking captain, and he's a bit of a unique unit because he is the most tanky single-handed axe unit in the game, potentially the single-handed axe unit that can do the most damage. He has precursor axes, a massive amount of health, good armor, very good defensive stats. So this is the best single-handed unit, single-handed axe unit in the game, but he's just so expensive and he dies easily to mostly to cavalry. But still a solid general's option. In terms of spears, we have the Nordic Levy or Leidangarmother. Then we have the Nordic Spearman or the Nordadvander Spjutmother. Then we have the Elite Nordic Spearman. Now there isn't really a word for elite in Old Norse. That is a later word, but you could call them something like Manadr Spjutmother, and the same for the Nordic Spear Masters, the Manadr Spjutmother, something like that. That would be like great men spearmen. So not a direct perfect translation by any means. But these, starting with the Nordic Levy, all of these units have the expert charge defense trait, which means that these units will do damage to enemy units that damage them on the charge, if they are stationary. The Nordic Levy is it's sturdy for the price. It has a nice amount of health and armor for the price, a decent amount of melee defense, and it's very good if it can support cavalry fights. The same with the Nordic Spearmen, a step up. They also have the spear wall, so they are better defensively. Then we have the Elite Nordic Spearmen. They are better defensively than the Nordic Spearmen, and they have a fairly high melee attack for being a spear unit. The Nordic Spearmasters, also a very solid tanky unit. They also have the Frenzy ability, and they inspire units around them. These spear units are not fear causing. The melee units are fear causing. Then we have Nordic Pikes, low armor, resistance to fatigue. Can be useful as a screen for your more expensive troops, so they don't get charged by cavalry. Can absolutely work in that role. Then we have the very cheap Nordic Band, and I quite like these units for their ability to disrupt enemy formations, throw precursor javelins at enemy cavalry, and just make sure that your important units don't get charged by cavalry. Now, looking at their stats, you can probably ascertain that they're not going to be able to hold against anything, and that is correct. However, if you look at the price of the Nordic Band, for the price of one Nordic Spear or one Nordic Levy, for the price of one Nordic Spear you can bring 3 Nordic Band and still have funds to spare, or for the price of Nordic Levy you can bring 2 Nordic Bands, and they won't do as well in prolonged engagements, but the main thing with these guys is throwing their precursors, stopping enemy charges, and stopping enemy charges from a devastating unit can be more than worth it when you can do it for as cheap as 120. Then we have the Nordic Brigade. They have 2 precursors. The problem is allowing them to throw those 2 precursors. I much prefer having 2 Nordic Band, although it's a bit more expensive. They also have more health, so you get more health for the funds if you buy 2 Nordic Bands instead of a Nordic Brigade. I haven't used Nordic Brigade much yet. I like the Nordic band too much. Wolfcoats, this is in my opinion a single player specific unit. It has no place in multiplayer armies whatsoever. It has the encourage ability, it has the stealth abilities. It's reasonably fast, but in my opinion, going for something like Hirdman or Hirdmother are superior. The Hirdman are actually very good units for the price. They scare, they have shield wall, they have a decent melee attack. They are almost like Roman infantry in that their charge bonus isn't great, but they do have some nice defensive capabilities. A high amount of health and morale as well for their price. A step up from those, you get the Nordic warriors. And I think the upgrade in a lot of cases makes sense, aside from that you get far less health. You do, however, get a superior charge bonus, you get more armor, you get precursor missiles, you also get a higher melee attack. So the Nordic warriors are definitely decent sword infantry. A step up from those again, we have the elite Nordic warriors. Again, an upgrade from the Nordic warriors with 2 precursors, higher morale, substantially so. They also have the frenzy ability, they scare everyone, they are immune to fear, good charge bonus, very low melee defense, but good melee attack. And the chosen warriors, in my opinion, are completely useless. The reason for that being that they aren't that much better offensively than the elite Nordic warriors. They cost significantly more. You're basically paying for a bit more charge, a bit more melee attack, but they have an amazing amount of morale, so they will hold until the last man in many cases. But they do lack the melee damage to justify their price. In terms of axe infantry, the Jutes have the best selection of axe infantry in the game. They have the Nordic axe warriors. However, the Nordic axe warriors don't make sense when you see what you get by upgrading to Huscarls or Húskarlar. The axe warriors have 48 melee attack, 56 and 57 charge, while with the Huskarlar for 75 extra you get a massive amount of melee attack, you get a massive amount of charge bonus, you get more armor, just everything that's fun, more health. If you're playing as the Jutes, you might as well bring the Huskarlar instead of the more fragile Nordic axe warriors. Both units will absolutely destroy enemy infantry units on the charge, every single enemy infantry unit in the game. The Nordic axe warriors will have a much harder time. If they get hit by one precursor volley, they're basically dead. So the Huskarlar will destroy every single melee unit in the game. The Nordic axe warriors will damage units a lot, but they don't have the capability to just outright destroy units as well as the Huskarlar do. Then we have the Nordic Axe Warband. In my opinion, a useless unit. Good melee attack, good charge bonus, very low melee defense, decent amount of armor, but they just flat out lose to sword units of comparable price, and that makes their use very questionable. They could potentially be good as flanking units and such, but it's just that these Huskarlar just do the job they do is so much better. The same goes for the Viking Raiders. While their stats are very nice in terms of melee attack, charge bonus, they have too little armor to be able to hold for long enough to do the damage they need to do repeatedly with their axes. So I would not bring Viking Raiders. The Royal Huskarlar are an upgrade from the Huskarlar, but it's questionable whether the upgrade is worth it, because they have the same strengths, the same weaknesses. They do inspire nearby units, which is nice, but in terms of killing power, these units are very similarly matched. Bringing a few of them is going to wreck enemy lines either way if they connect. Norse berserkers, Nordadvander berserker, useless unit, completely useless unit. They don't have a bonus against infantry, they only have axes. While they do have a nice amount of melee attack, morale, and the ability to go amok, they are massively underperforming compared to the two-handed axe units. Like, they are, if they had two-handed axes, they would maybe, a huge maybe, be worth it, but due to their low armor and low health, I just don't see a place for them in any army, to be honest. And since there are fair effects in place on many of the other units, the Norse berserkers just do not make sense. Some of the cheapest bows in the game belong to the Jutes, and these guys can actually be very useful in, I've made a few videos about this, when you want to stack fair effects on the enemy. You can use whistling shot, flaming shot, and then you can use Nordic hurlers to reduce the movement speed of an enemy and also reduce his melee capabilities. So that can be very useful strategically if you want to start a chain route. You can start the chain route by picking out one single enemy unit that to charge with one of your good units. The fair, the flaming, the whistling and the hurlers are going to make it so that you can break a lot of enemy units very, very quickly, and that will allow you to either break through the enemy formation and start recharging, or it will allow you to start a chain route. For skirmishers, we have the Thraitel skirmishers, we have the Nordic skirmishers, we have Nordic brigands and Nordic javelins. The main difference between these units is the amount of ammo that they carry and the amount of damage that each javelin does. So all javelins are good against large units, and they have a decent amount of armor piercing, but not great compared to crossbows. They have a nice bonus versus cavalry, so they can be nice for that purpose. The Thraitel skirmishers are the most cost effective out of these against cavalry, simply because they are the cheapest one, and you only lose one javelin when upgrading to Nordic skirmishers. You only lose one javelin on the Thraitel skirmishers. But you lose precision shot. So I haven't used javelins too much, because I much prefer having longer range skirmish support. But if you need to take care of enemy cavalry, they can be nice. For melee cavalry, we have the Nordic mounted raiders, Nordic horse raiders, and the Viking raider cavalry. The Viking raider cavalry, in my opinion, is useless, because it will lose to any and all decent melee cavalry units in the game. The same for the Nordic horse raiders. I don't see a place for them. I don't see a place for the Nordic mounted raiders. They are very fast, but they will just straight out die in any kind of prolonged engagement. Now, the unit that I really like is the Nordic horse lords. They have a massive amount of armor, a massive amount of health. They have precursor javelins, good melee attack, a decent charge bonus. And one of the trump cards possessed by the Nordic horse lords is that they have the headhunt ability. Now headhunt will make these units unbreakable for 30 seconds. Cavalry fights take long enough as it is, but what you can do with the Nordic horse lords is that once you are on the verge of losing, on the verge of breaking against a unit like Tagmata, you can just make the unit unbreakable. They will fight down to the last man, and that gives you 30 extra seconds to support the fight, or 30 extra seconds before the Tagmata start attacking your infantry. So very, very useful ability by the Nordic horse lords. And also their javelins have a bonus against large. So if you're able to throw both javelins before they rush into combat, they can do very well against enemy cavalry units. Nordic raiders, don't waste your time, completely useless. They cost the same as the Nordic horse lords, and they are super difficult to make work because they lack Parthian shot. They have all of these stealth abilities that are kind of useless in multiplayer. Then we have the warhounds, super cheap units. They will have a hard time basically killing skirmishers. They are absolutely terrible in multiplayer. However, they can be useful for messing up an enemy line before the charge. The problem is though that cavalry will just be able to ride straight over them and just ignore them. But they can be useful if your enemy doesn't know what to do and you're able to block an entire line from getting charges. Then the warhounds can be very useful, but just don't expect them to get any kills. Now let's have a look at the units by the Jutes, and the main units to have a look at now are going to be the Húskarlar, because we have looked at most of the other Nordic units in the Dane and Geat faction review. The Jutes, probably the faction I've played the most in multiplayer, because they are very cool. So, time to have a look at the army. Up front we have the guerrilla deployment units, the Nordic brigands, wolf coats, Nordic raiders, elite Nordic spears, Nordic spearmasters, and these units with the round shields and the color scheme it's very Viking, and I absolutely love it. Their armor is also pretty much on point. Elite Nordic warriors, chosen warriors, Nordic levy, Nordic bows, Nordic band, probably the worst melee unit in the game, Nordic axe warriors, and now we're starting to talk about iconic units that can wreck enemies. The same with the Húskarlar and the Royal Húskarlar. Awesome, awesome units. Then we have the dogs. Very weak dogs compared to the Alani dogs, but they can be fun to play with. Nordic can be fun to play with the dogs. That's something. Then we have the Nordic hurlers. Their shot reduces the speed of enemy units. Nordic skirmishers, Viking raiders. Cool looking unit, but of questionable value in multiplayer. The same with the Nordic axe warband, very questionable in multiplayer. Nordic warriors, don't like their shields at all. They look horrible. Nordic hurlers over there. Nordic spearmen, again terrible shields. And let's see, here are the Nordic horse lords. Another very cool looking unit and a super strong unit. For the other cavalry units we have the Viking Raider Cavalry, which is kind of useless because it will lose to any and all cavalry units, and it's about as expensive as the Nordic Horse Lords, so you really want to bring Nordic Horse Lords instead, as many of you as you want. If you want to bring additional cavalry, sure, you can bring some Nordic Mounted Raiders to take care of some skirmishers or go for rear charges, but I really think that you should go for 6 Nordic Horse Lords. And let's just have a look at a few builds that can be both effective and fun to play with as the Jutes. Just bring it back to normal large armies, normal armies. Now these are going to be a few builds that I've used and I've had quite a bit of success with in quick battles and friendly battles. Some of them are very weird, some of them are pretty strong competitive builds. So first, weird build that works, but can work, but it's not super strong. It's just it's a bit gimmicky, I guess. So here we are. So I need to take out a Huscarl and take out the Hird Mother and bring in. Yeah. So the pikes are spread thin up front. Directly behind the pikes we have a Nordic band that rushes in to throw javelins and block enemy charges. The follow-up from Húskarlar will destroy any and all infantry units, while the Nordic Horse Lords mainly protect the flanks and try to engage enemy cavalry together with the Hird Mother, and the Nordic pikemen protect from frontal cavalry charges against the Húskarlar, or they protect from rear charges against enemy cavalry. Now, another build that I have had quite a lot of fun with, it's a bit of more infantry-centric build. Let's see here. Bring the Nordic warriors, 4 of those, to Húskarlar. This is going to be straight up an aggressive rush build. That's it. Very simple, very easy. You have 3 3 units that can rush in and destroy enemy units. These guys are going to be your center and hold. They won't be able to win against good infantry, but that isn't the point either. They're just going to hold while your Nordic Horse Lords and the elite Nordic Spearmen win the cavalry fight, hopefully. You can also use a variation of this build that allows you to bring a bit more infantry, so it's going to be easier to support your Nordic Horse Lords. So in any build, Nordic Horse Lords are going to be a major part of it. If you want to go with a slightly smaller amount of Nordic Horse Lords, you absolutely can. And the build that I'm going to be taking a look at now is going to be a build that doesn't have the punching power. It has more staying power, but it doesn't have the punching power of the previous builds. So in this build you're going to have to be a lot more defensive with your with your spear units, protect your flanks, protect your infantry from the enemy cavalry, and also you're going to want some Nordic band units. And these Nordic band units are mainly there to ensure that the enemy doesn't get charges on your main line. They are there to do damage with precursors against enemy cavalry. Basically there to just be annoying tank hit point damage for your Nordic warriors, and ensure that your enemy either has to ignore them and allow them to throw precursors on cavalry, or engage them, which will allow you to follow up with units like Nordic Horse Lords or Nordic Warriors. So that's it for the Jutes, my favorite Viking forefather faction. Strength and honor.